I still remember the echo of my heels on the marble courthouse floor, sharp and steady, like the heartbeat I had trained myself to control no matter how much the world tried to shatter me. My mother's whisper sliced through the air beside me, venom wrapped in pearls. "Don't embarrass us. Just stay quiet and let the real lawyers handle this." She didn't even look at me when she said it because in her mind I wasn't worth the dignity of eye contact. My father, walking just ahead, kept his gaze locked forward, pretending I wasn't there at all, as if I were a stain clinging to the edges of their perfect lives. That was nothing new. My name is Anna. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, I've been the family disappointment, the dropout, the failure, the girl my parents erased whenever someone asked how many children they had. We weren't at court that morning for me. We were there because my parents wanted to evict a tenant, a single mother named Claire who had dared to ask for repairs before paying her rent. Black mold had spread across her daughter's bedroom ceiling, and instead of fixing it, my parents filed for eviction. They inherited 3 properties from my grandfather, and they treated them like fiefdoms, money first, people last. My mother had laughed over the phone just weeks before. "A little moisture, she's being picky." That little moisture was poison seeping into a child's lungs. I hadn't planned to get involved until I overheard my sister Melissa casually mention the case. She didn't know I'd spent the last 7 years clawing my way through law school. She didn't know I'd passed the bar, that I was working at a small firm downtown, fighting for people exactly like Claire. My parents didn't know because they hadn't asked. They hadn't even known I went to college. The day I walked out at 19, my father threw my clothes into the yard and screamed, "You're nothing. You'll never amount to anything without us." My mother's arms had folded like iron bars across the doorway. "Don't crawl back when you fail." I never crawled back. Not when I was sleeping in my car behind grocery stores. Not when I survived on vending machine dinners. Not when I worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep my eyes open in class. I starved before I asked them for help. My pride was all I had. And yet here I was walking into the same courtroom as them. My mother smoothing her blouse, her pearls gleaming under the lights, her mask of perfection intact. My father adjusting his tailored jacket, every thread whispering respectability. And me, their shadow, their discard, walking toward the very tenant they were trying to destroy. Claire sat hunched at the defendant's table, hands twisting in her lap. Exhaustion was etched into her face. This wasn't just about rent for her, it was about keeping a roof over her daughter's head. She looked so small, sitting alone, already defeated. I walked past my parents without a word. My mother hissed at me to sit in the gallery, but I didn't stop. Instead, I set my briefcase down beside Claire and whispered, "I'm your attorney." Her eyes widened in disbelief. I can't afford one. I was going to represent myself." "Consider this pro bono," I said, steadying my voice. "You have rights, and today we're going to make sure they're heard." The sharp inhale behind me told me my mother had realized what I was doing. My father's growl followed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" For the first time in 12 years, I turned and met his eyes. Calm, unflinching. "I'm doing my job." When the judge entered the room, hushed. Judge Patricia Holbrook, steel gray hair, sharp eyes that could slice through lies like a scalpel. She looked at me, her gaze flickering with faint recognition. "Counsel, please approach." I introduced myself, Anna Thompson, attorney for the defense. She nodded slowly, almost knowingly. "Didn't you argue Riverside Apartments last year?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You won that case," she said. "Repairs, damages, full reimbursement." "That's correct." Her eyes lingered on me a moment longer, then shifted to my parents. This should be interesting. I'll never forget my mother's face, then horror laced with disbelief. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening like steel under fire. Melissa sat frozen in the gallery, her hand pressed to her mouth, unable to process what was happening. When Gerald, my parents' high-priced lawyer, presented his case, he spoke smoothly as if Claire was just another nuisance. He showed pristine photographs of the apartment taken years ago, argued that Claire was making mountains out of molehills. When it was my turn, I stood with every piece of evidence. I had spent weeks gathering photos of mold, dripping down walls. Maintenance requests ignored for months, medical records showing Claire's daughter's respiratory issues. I laid them before the judge, piece by piece, like bricks stacking into an unshakable wall. This isn't about a tenant who refuses to pay, I said. My voice didn't shake, though my heart thundered. This is about a landlord who allowed poison to grow above a child's bed. This is about a home turned into a hazard while rent was still collected month after month. I watched Judge Holbrook's jaw tighten as she read the inspector's report declaring the unit uninhabitable. When Gerald tried to argue minor moisture issues, her gaze snapped to my parents, her expression thin with disgust. By the time I finished, no one doubted who was in the wrong. The judge ruled in Claire's favor. Eviction dismissed, mandatory repairs, reimbursement of rent and medical bills. My parents sat pale and silent, stripped of their masks. Claire sobbed into my arms, whispering thank you again and again, as if I had handed her back her future. In that moment, I thought I'd finally proven myself. 12 years of being told I was nothing erased with the slam of a gavel. But as I gathered my things, my mother approached me in the hallway, her face twisted with fury. How dare you humiliate us like that? I did my job. Your job? You destroyed your own family. I stared into her eyes and spoke words that had waited a lifetime to be born. You stopped being my family the day you threw me out. Her face drained of color. My father's fists clenched, but before he could speak, I cut him off. You risked a child's life for $1,200 a month. You're lucky you're not in handcuffs. And I walked away. But I knew it wasn't over. My parents weren't the kind to let humiliation go. That night, Melissa texted me. Mom and Dad are furious. They're talking about suing you. Please be careful. Of course they were. They always retaliated. It was who they were. But I told myself I'd survived worse. I'd survived hunger, loneliness, and nights when the cold seeped through the windows of my car. I could survive them, or so I thought. The next day my phone rang, an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Anna Thompson. A man's voice measured and steady. Yes, who's this? My name is Henry Bradford. I was your grandfather's attorney. I need to speak with you about something urgent, something your parents don't know about. My breath caught. My grandfather. My mother's father had been dead for over a decade. His estate long since divided. What could possibly be urgent now? I can't explain over the phone, Henry said. Meet me tomorrow morning, 9:00 a.m. at my office. And just like that, the world shifted under my feet. Because when I walked into his office the next morning, when he slid that thick folder across his desk, I learned that my grandfather, the only one who had ever looked at me with kindness when my parents saw only failure, had left behind a secret. A trust fund. $50,000 meant for me. Money that had grown into nearly $60,000 with interest. A letter written in his own hand telling me he believed in me, telling me I was worth more than my parents ever admitted. And then the words that stopped my breath entirely. I was planning to change my will, to leave you half of everything, but I ran out of time. Half of everything, the properties, the savings, the inheritance my parents clung to like lifeblood. And suddenly, the doubts I'd buried for years erupted like fire. Because Henry looked at me with weary eyes and said words I would never forget. Your grandfather was in perfect health. And then within a week of your mother visiting me, he was dead. Heart failure, they said. But his doctor swore he was healthy. Too healthy for that kind of sudden end. A chill spread through me. My parents hadn't just stolen my future. They might have stolen his life. And for the first time I realized the storm I thought I'd walked away from was only just beginning. Henry's office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, the kind of place that seemed to hold secrets in its walls. The morning light filtered through heavy curtains streaking across rows of law books worn from decades of use. He pushed the folder closer, his eyes gentle but heavy with something more than just professional formality. Your grandfather loved you, Henry said. His voice cracked slightly, as if carrying the weight of what he'd guarded all these years. He saw what your parents did to you, how they tore you down, and it broke his heart. This trust, it was his way of protecting you. I traced my fingers across the edge of the folder, but my eyes were fixed on the envelope tucked inside. Henry nodded, giving me silent permission. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was instantly familiar. My grandfather's script. Careful, deliberate, written with the precision of a man who valued truth in ink because truth was too often denied in life. Dear Anna, it began. The first line blurred as tears filled my eyes. If you're reading this, it means you've done what I always knew you could. You've built a life on your own, no matter how hard they tried to convince you otherwise. I'm proud of you. I bit down hard, the words cutting into places I thought I had long since scarred over. I could almost hear his voice, gentle and steady, telling me things I had starved to hear from my own parents. The letter went on confessing what I had always suspected but never allowed myself to admit aloud. He'd seen the favoritism. He'd watched as my parents showered Melissa with praise and reduced me to shadows. He'd wanted to change his will to give me half to finally tip the balance in my favor, but time had betrayed him. The final lines made my breath catch. Be careful, Anna. Your parents care more about money than love. Don't let them destroy you. You are stronger than they are. When I finished, the paper shook in my hands. The truth was written there in the shaky letters of a man who had tried to protect me even from beyond the grave. But Henry wasn't finished. He leaned forward, lowering his voice, as though someone might overhear even in his soundproofed office. The week before your grandfather died, your mother came to see me. She was asking questions about the will, about whether he'd made changes. She was unusually persistent. My heart twisted, and then he died. Henry nodded gravely. Heart failure, they said. But James was in excellent health. His physician even wrote a letter to the paper saying he couldn't understand it. The room spun slightly around me. Are you suggesting? I can't prove anything, Henry said. But I've practiced law for 40 years, and I know when something feels wrong. Your grandfather's death was convenient. Too convenient. Especially for your parents. Convenient. The word rattled in my chest. I thought of my mother's pearls, my father's tailored suits, the way they clung to money, like it was oxygen. What would they do if that oxygen were threatened? I left Henry's office with the folder pressed against my chest, the letter tucked carefully in my bag, and a hollow drumbeat echoing in my ears. What if he was right? The idea gnawed at me all day until finally I couldn't ignore it. I went to the library, pulled out old newspapers, and searched the archives. It didn't take long to find what I feared. My grandfather's obituary was brief, respectful, final, but a week later, tucked away on the second page, was a letter from his physician, Dr. Russell Hayes. As James Thompson's doctor, the letter read, I was shocked by his sudden passing. His last examination showed no signs of cardiac failure. He was, in my professional opinion, exceptionally healthy for his age. My pulse roared in my ears. Dr. Hayes had doubted it too. I tracked him down, calling the number listed for his retirement home. My voice shook when he answered. Dr. Hayes, my name is Anna Thompson. You were my grandfather's doctor. There was a pause on the line long enough that I thought he might hang up. Finally, he said yes. I remember James. A good man. His death troubled me. I swallowed. Can we meet, please? An hour later, I was sitting on a park bench, the ducks circling the pond as Dr. Hayes, frail now but sharp-eyed, fed breadcrumbs into the water. I've carried this guilt for 12 years, he began quietly. Your grandfather came to me 2 days before he died. He complained of nausea, dizziness, tingling in his hands and feet. I ran tests, but the results wouldn't be back for a week. I thought it was nothing, maybe a virus. I sent him home. I leaned forward, my chest tightening. What did the results show? He tossed another crumb into the water, his hand shaking. Elevated levels of digoxin. The word landed like a stone in my stomach. Digoxin, I repeated. It's a heart medication, he explained. But your grandfather wasn't taking any heart medication. The levels in his system were high enough to induce arrhythmia, high enough to kill him. I could barely breathe. You're saying he was poisoned? I'm saying someone gave him digoxin over several days, likely slipped into food or drink. By the time the results came back, he was gone. He turned to me, then eyes brimming with shame. I went to the police. They dismissed it, said it was natural causes. The medical examiner backed them up. They said the digoxin could have been a lab error. Why didn't you push harder? I demanded, my voice breaking. Dr. Hayes flinched. Because your father came to me. He told me the family wanted peace, no investigations. He said your grandmother would be destroyed if she thought something sinister had happened. And then, he offered me money, enough to cover my wife's cancer treatments. I took it. His voice cracked. To my eternal shame, I took it. The world tilted. My father had bribed him, which meant my father knew, which meant... Tears burned my eyes. Would you testify now? Would you put it in writing? He nodded, slow but certain. I should have done it then. But I can do it now. I don't want to die carrying this. By that evening, I had a notarized statement in my hands, every word damning. And yet, when I took it to the district attorney the next morning, her expression was grim. "This is serious," Catherine Morris said, scanning the document. "But it's circumstantial. After 12 years, physical evidence is gone. We need more financial records, purchase histories, something tangible." "But we have motive," I pressed. "My grandfather was about to change his will. My parents were drowning in debt. They stood to lose millions if he followed through. Their attorney can confirm that my mother asked questions just days before he died." Catherine leaned back, her expression hard. "It's not enough. Suspicion isn't conviction. If you want justice, you'll need something they can't explain away. Something tangible, something irrefutable." That night, I sat in my car outside the courthouse, staring at the city lights bleeding into the sky. And I thought of one person, the only person still inside their home, still caught in their orbit, still blind enough to be trusted. Melissa. My fingers hovered over my phone, but I pressed dial before doubt could stop me. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice wary. "Anna, you shouldn't be calling me. They'll be furious if they know." "They already are," I said bitterly. "Melissa, listen to me. I think they killed Grandpa." There was silence on the line, then a whisper. "What?" I told her everything. The trust fund, Henry's suspicions, Dr. Hayes's testimony, the letter, the debts. Every word felt like glass slicing my throat, but I forced them out. She tried to deny it at first. No, that's impossible. They couldn't. They let a child breathe in mold for months because they didn't want to pay for repairs," I snapped. "They threw me out on the street at 19. They humiliated me for years. What makes you think they wouldn't do worse when millions of dollars were at stake?" Her silence said everything. Finally, her voice came quiet and shaking. "What do you need from me?" I exhaled, slowly, relief and dread tangling together. "Mom keeps records, doesn't she? Files, receipts, every little thing." "Yes, in the basement. She keeps everything." "I need you to find something. Bank statements, pharmacy receipts, anything from the months before Grandpa died. If they bought digoxin or even foxglove seeds, we'll have them." "Anna, if I find something, what happens to them?" I close my eyes, then they go to prison. Her voice broke. "And what happens to me?" I had no answer. She was their golden child, the one they'd sheltered and spoiled. If they went to prison, she would be left alone with the truth she could never unlearn. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "but the truth matters more than anything." She hesitated, then finally said, "I'll look." When the call ended, I sat in the dark with my phone pressed to my chest. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, because I had just asked my sister to help me destroy our parents. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I was ready for the truth I was chasing. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. Every second stretched out like an accusation, a question with no answer. I couldn't eat. I couldn't work. Even sleep refused to come. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment, imagining the possible outcomes of Melissa's search. What if she found nothing? What if all I had were suspicions and whispers, the kind of story no jury would ever convict on? What if she found proof undeniable and damning? And what if she betrayed me, running straight to our parents to warn them? The possibilities circled endlessly until I was sick with them. When my phone finally rang the next evening, I nearly dropped it in my scramble to answer. "Anna." Her voice was tight, ragged around the edges. "I found something." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop on the far edge of town, away from any place our parents might recognize. I drove there on autopilot, my chest a cage afire, and when I walked inside, I nearly didn't recognize my sister. Melissa looked pale, hollow-eyed, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder like it was a live grenade. She slid it across the table without a word. I opened it with shaking fingers. The first pages were credit card statements. My heart thudded harder with each line. "Look here," Melissa whispered, pointing to a highlighted charge. "Online pharmacy, digitalis purpurea seeds." I froze. "Foxglove, the plant where digoxin comes from, poison dressed as a flower. They bought it 3 weeks before Grandpa died," she whispered. The room seemed to tilt. Melissa pushed more papers toward me. Bank statements this time. 2 months before their account was overdrawn by 30,000. 3 maxed out credit cards. They were drowning Anna. And then suddenly after his death, they weren't. My vision blurred as I stared at the numbers. They hadn't just been greedy, they'd been desperate. Melissa's hands trembled as she reached into her bag again and pulled out a small spiral-bound notebook. She set it on the table as though it burned her fingers. I found this in Mom's desk drawer, hidden under old receipts. I opened it. At first, it looked harmless enough. Grocery lists, appointment reminders. But then I turned a page dated 3 weeks before my grandfather's death. My stomach turned to ice. Jay says he's changing the will, giving half to Anna. Can't let that happen. Need to act fast. My hands shook violently as I turned the page. Notes scrawled in my mother's sharp handwriting. Research shows digoxin hard to detect. Looks like heart failure. Jay drinks tea every morning. Easy to add to tea. The following pages were calculations, dosage notes, ideas on timing, and then the entry that made me feel like the floor had vanished under me. It's done. Doctor says heart failure. No one suspects. We're safe. Properties are ours. Melissa was crying silently across from me, tears streaking down her face. She killed him, she whispered. Mom killed Grandpa. She planned it, wrote it down like it was a project. And Dad must have known. He must have helped. I carefully photographed each page with my phone, my chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. When I finally looked up, Melissa's eyes were wide and wet. Are you willing to testify? I asked quietly. To say you found these in her desk, to confirm this is her handwriting. She nodded, wiping her tears. I have to. I can't. I can't protect them anymore. Grandpa was good to us. He loved us. And they killed him for money. Her voice cracked on the last word and I felt my heart splinter. Melissa, I said gently, once we take this to the DA, there's no turning back. They'll be arrested. There will be a trial. Everything will come out. She closed her eyes, breathing in shaky gulps. I know, but you showed me in court what it means to do the right thing even when it costs you. I can't live with this secret, not anymore. I reached across the table and took her trembling hand. For the first time in years, we weren't on opposite sides of our parents' wall, we were together. That night, we walked into the police station side by side. Catherine Morris was called in even though it was after hours. She sat across from us in a small, windowless interview room as we laid out everything: the trust fund, Dr. Hayes' testimony, the financial records, and finally the notebook. Catherine's face grew darker with every page. This, she said finally, her voice low, is enough. We can get a warrant. We can move tonight. Melissa gasped. Tonight? The longer we wait, Catherine explained, the more chance they have to destroy evidence. If they realize we're on to them, they might flee. We can't risk that. 2 hours later, I sat in Catherine's office, Melissa's hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt as we watched the police descend on my parents' house through a live monitor feed. I'll never forget the image. My mother answering the door in her silk robe, confusion flickering across her face as the officers read her rights. Watching her expression collapse into horror as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. My father shouting, blustering, his face purple with rage as they shoved him toward a patrol car. Melissa's voice broke beside me. It's real. It's really happening. I felt nothing. Not joy, not sorrow, just numbness. Because everything I had ever feared about them, everything I had buried, had just been confirmed in the most brutal way. The next morning, they were arraigned in front of Judge Holbrook, the same judge who had watched me stand against them in Claire's case. I saw the flicker of recognition in her eyes as the charges were read aloud: first-degree murder, evidence, tampering, fraud. Bail was set at $2 million, ironically the exact amount they had inherited from my grandfather's life insurance policy. They couldn't pay it. Their accounts were frozen, their assets locked. For the first time in their lives, money couldn't save them. The story spread like wildfire. Prominent landlords arrested for murder. Daughter uncovers parents' deadly secret. 12-year-old cold case reopened. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. My face was splashed across headlines. I was called a hero, though I didn't feel like one. And then just when I thought the nightmare couldn't grow deeper, I got a call. It was Claire's lawyer, the tenant I'd defended. Anna, you need to hear this, he said. After your parents' arrest, several other tenants came forward. They described threats, intimidation. One man, Thomas, said your father told him last year, keep complaining about the furnace and you'll end up like my father-in-law. He thought it was just bluster. But now it sounds like a confession. I sank into my chair, my hand pressed over my mouth. My father had used my grandfather's death as a weapon. A warning, a boast, the arrogance of it, the sheer cruelty. That night, Melissa came to my apartment. She'd moved out of their house, staying with a friend, her face still pale, but her eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. "I keep thinking about the signs," she whispered. "The way they acted after Grandpa died. Like they were relieved, not grieving. The way they spent money so easily right after. How they always shut me down when I asked questions. I should have known." "You were young," I said softly. "And they were your parents. You trusted them. That's what children do." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Can you forgive me for not seeing sooner? For not standing up for you when they threw you out?" "There's nothing to forgive," I told her. "You were caught in their web too, just in a different way. But you broke free. That's what matters." She nodded, wiping her face. "What happens now?" "Now we testify," I said firmly. "We make sure they never hurt anyone else again. And after that, we figure out how to build something new, together." Melissa smiled, then fragile but real. "Together," she repeated. And for the first time in my life, I believed her. The trial was still months away, but I knew the storm had only begun. My parents had built their lives on greed, cruelty, and lies. Now those lies were unraveling strand by strand. And I was the one pulling the thread. 6 months later, I walked back into a courtroom, not as a defense attorney this time, but as a witness. The trial had drawn reporters from across the state. The gallery was packed with former tenants, curious onlookers, and journalists who scribbled notes furiously as the drama of our family imploded in public. Melissa sat beside me in the front row, her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked older somehow, as if the weight of what she'd uncovered had carved new lines into her face. But there was strength there too, a quiet steel I'd never seen in her before. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney, a desperate-looking man named Frank, who had taken their case when no one else would. My mother, once polished and radiant, now wore an orange jumpsuit. Her hair had turned gray during her months in jail, her skin sallow under the harsh lights. My father sat hunched, his arrogance wilted, his eyes hollow. And presiding over it all was Judge Patricia Holbrook, the same judge who had once watched me stand against my parents in Claire's case. When her eyes flickered toward me, I thought I saw something like recognition, maybe even respect. The prosecution began methodically. Catherine Morris, the DA, laid out the evidence piece by piece, each layer, another nail hammered into the coffin of my parents' defense. She showed the financial records, months of overdrafts, maxed-out credit cards, debts they had hidden beneath their veneer of respectability. She showed the credit card receipts for foxglove seeds, highlighted and undeniable. She presented the notebook in my mother's handwriting, each page displayed on a projector so the jury could see the chilling scrawl for themselves. Page after page. Plans, dosages, notes, and the final entry. "It's done. Doctor says heart failure. No one suspects. We're safe." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The jurors' faces hardened as the evidence stacked higher and higher. Then came the witnesses. Dr. Hayes was the first to testify. His voice shook as he described the elevated digoxin levels, the symptoms, the bribe my father had offered him. He admitted his guilt in staying silent. Several jurors wiped their eyes as he choked on his words. "I should have spoken then. I should have told the truth. I let money buy my silence, and I've carried that shame ever since." Henry Bradford, my grandfather's attorney, followed. He testified about my mother's visit the week before the death, her relentless questions about the will, her desperation to know whether changes had been made. He read aloud the sealed provisions of my grandfather's trust, explaining how he had intended to give me half, how he had written a letter preparing me for that truth. Then came Thomas, the tenant my father had threatened. He stood stiffly in the witness box, his hands gripping the rail. He told me, "Keep pushing about the furnace and you'll end up like my father-in-law." I thought it was just bluster. Now I know it was a confession. The weight of his words hung heavy in the room. My father wouldn't meet his eyes. When Melissa's name was called, my heart clenched. I squeezed her hand once before she rose. She walked to the stand with a steadiness that amazed me, lifting her chin as she swore to tell the truth. "Please describe what you found in your mother's desk," Catherine asked. Melissa's voice was calm, deliberate. "I found a notebook. It contained plans to poison my grandfather with digoxin, dosage notes, methods of delivery, and an entry the day after his death stating it was done that no one suspected." Frank, my parents' attorney, tried to object, tried to cast doubt, but the handwriting experts had already confirmed it. Melissa's testimony was the final nail. When Catherine asked why she came forward, Melissa's eyes glistened, but her voice did not waver. Because my grandfather was a good man who loved us. He didn't deserve to die for money. And my sister didn't deserve to be thrown away like garbage. The truth matters more than protecting people who don't deserve protection. The room was silent except for the scratch of reporters' pens. My mother buried her face in her hands and sobbed loud and theatrical, but no one in that room was moved. Finally, it was my turn. As I walked to the stand, the strangest calm settled over me. I had dreaded this moment, replayed it in my head for months. But when I stood there looking out at the faces before me, I felt detached, almost weightless. Catherine asked me to describe my relationship with my parents. I told the truth, all of it. The favoritism, the abuse, the day they threw me out, the years of struggle, the way they tried to crush me every time I found the strength to stand. "Why do you believe they treated you this way?" Catherine asked. "Because I represented something they couldn't control," I said. My voice was steady, but my throat burned. Because my grandfather loved me, and they couldn't stand that. Because if they admitted I had worth, they would have to confront their own cruelty. It was easier to pretend I was worthless than admit they had failed as parents. Frank tried to paint me as vindictive, tried to suggest I had always wanted revenge. "Isn't it true," he pressed, "that you've hated your parents for years, that you've been waiting for this moment?" "I didn't hate them," I said softly. "I was hurt. There's a difference. And I never wanted revenge. I wanted justice for Claire, for my grandfather, for every tenant they exploited. If that brought consequences to them, that was the result of their choices, not mine." "But you stand to inherit, don't you?" he pushed. "If they're convicted, you gain everything." I met his eyes. "I don't want their money. I never did. Every dollar they had is blood money. It should go to their victims. All I want is the truth to stand." Silence followed. Even Frank couldn't find words to twist that. The trial lasted 3 weeks. When Catherine delivered her closing, she stood before the jury and spoke with the weight of every fact, every life harmed. They murdered a kind man for money. They poisoned him, slowly, watched him die, and showed no remorse. They lived 12 years in comfort while his granddaughter starved in her car. Justice demands a guilty verdict. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they returned, I felt Melissa's hand slide into mine, both of us gripping tight. The 4 women stood. "On the count of first-degree murder, we find the defendants guilty." The air seemed to shatter. My mother collapsed, wailing. My father sat stone-faced as if the life had drained from him. "On the count of evidence tampering, guilty. On the count of fraud, guilty." Judge Holbrook scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. As the bailiffs led my parents away, my mother turned one last time, her eyes blazing. "I hope you're satisfied. You've destroyed this family." I stood meeting her glare without flinching. "No. You destroyed this family the day you chose greed over love. I just made sure the truth was heard." Her scream echoed as they dragged her out of the courtroom. Sentencing day was gray and heavy, as though the sky itself carried the weight of what was about to happen. The courtroom was silent as Judge Holbrook looked down at my parents with undisguised disappointment. "You murdered your own father, your children's grandfather, for money?" she said, her voice cutting like a blade. "You calculated his death, concealed the evidence, and lived for years in comfort while others suffered. No sentence will ever be enough for what you've done." She paused, her gaze unflinching. "On the count of first-degree murder, I sentence you each to life in prison without parole. On the counts of evidence tampering and fraud, I sentence you each to an additional 15 years. You will spend the rest of your lives behind bars." The gavel fell, final, irrevocable. My mother screamed, a guttural sound that curdled the air. My father wept silently, his shoulders shaking. As they were led away, I felt no joy, no triumph, only relief that they could never hurt anyone again. Reporters crowded outside the courthouse, shouting questions. "Anna, how do you feel? What will you do with the inheritance? What's next for you?" I told them the truth. "I feel relieved. I don't want their money. It will go to the people they hurt. What's next? I'll keep doing what I've always done, fighting for people who need help, who deserve justice." But when the cameras turned away, when the crowds dispersed, Melissa and I went somewhere no one followed. We went to my grandfather's grave. We knelt there together, side by side, for the first time in 12 years. The stone was simple James Thompson, beloved father and grandfather, 1940 to 2013. Melissa touched the stone gently. We got them, Grandpa. They're going to pay for what they did to you. My throat tightened. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry you didn't live to see me prove them wrong. But I never forgot what you told me, that I was worth more than they said. You were right. The wind rustled through the trees, the sun dipped low, and for the first time in years, I felt like maybe he could finally rest. And maybe, just maybe, so could I. 3 months after sentencing, I stood in the conference room at Kestrel and Associates, facing 23 former tenants of my parents' properties. The room buzzed with nervous energy, the air thick with grief and hope. Some had children with them, some came with crutches or oxygen tanks, their bodies carrying the scars of years spent living in unlivable conditions. I looked at them, the people my parents had exploited, silenced, threatened, and I felt a responsibility heavier than anything I had ever carried in court. The court has ordered the liquidation of all assets belonging to Helen and Robert Thompson, I explained, my voice steady, despite the tremor I felt inside. The 3 rental properties have been sold, their investments, their personal assets, everything. After legal fees and costs, there's approximately $1.8 million remaining. I paused, letting the weight of the number settle. That money will be distributed among you, to the tenants who endured unsafe conditions, to those who paid medical bills because of their negligence. It's not enough to erase the harm, but it's what justice can give. A woman in the back raised her hand. How much will each of us get? It depends on the severity of the harm and the documentation of damages, I said. Some will receive more if they can prove ongoing medical expenses or severe hardship, but our estimates range from $30,000 to $70,000 per person. A murmur swept through the room, relief, gratitude, tears. Then a man stood, his voice breaking. That money should go to you. You're the one who brought them down. Without you, none of this would have happened. I shook my head. I didn't fight for money. I fought because it was right. This belongs to you, not me. I have my grandfather's trust fund that's more than enough. What I wanted was justice, and today you're all part of that justice. The room filled with soft applause, some people crying openly, others clinging to one another. For the first time, these victims weren't invisible. They weren't powerless. They were heard. After everyone left, Diane Kestrel, the senior partner who had first believed in me, walked in. She smiled faintly. You did good today, Anna. A lot of lawyers would have taken a hefty fee. You didn't. I won't profit from my parents' crimes, I said simply. She nodded. Then her expression shifted, thoughtful, almost hesitant. I'm thinking of retiring in a few years. I'd like you to consider taking over the firm. My breath caught. Diane, are you serious? Completely. You're the best attorney I've trained. You fight like hell, but you care. That combination doesn't come often. She smiled. Think about it. That evening, Melissa and I met for dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. She'd enrolled in paralegal courses, and she told me about her classes with a spark in her eyes I'd never seen before. She looked healthier, lighter, as though the weight of our parents' manipulation had finally slipped off her shoulders. Guess what Diane told me today, I said, sipping my coffee. What? She wants me to take over the firm one day. Melissa's face lit up. That's incredible, Anna. You're going to change so many lives. I smiled, though part of me still struggled to believe it. Maybe. But what matters most is that Grandpa would be proud. That's enough. We talked about normal things, her homework, my caseload, whether I should finally adopt the stray cat that kept showing up outside my apartment. It felt strange and wonderful to have a sister again, a real relationship not poisoned by comparison or manipulation. But then Melissa grew quiet. She set down her fork, her eyes distant. I visited them, she said softly. My stomach tightened. At the prison, she nodded. I needed closure. I needed to see them one more time. And I asked cautiously. She swallowed hard. Mom tried to guilt me, said I betrayed the family. Dad just cried, said he was sorry. But neither of them took responsibility, not once. Even now they refuse to admit what they did. A bitter ache spread through me. Some people will never change, Melissa. They can't. It's not our burden anymore. I know, she whispered. I told them goodbye, for good this time. We walked through downtown Omaha after dinner, past the old courthouse where everything had begun. I thought of that day months ago, walking in, expecting nothing, leaving with everything changed. The sound of my mother's hiss, the disbelief in my father's eyes, the judge's recognition, Claire's tears of gratitude. All of it had been the spark that lit the fire that burned down everything false in our family. Melissa broke the silence. Do you ever wish things had been different? That we had normal parents? A normal childhood? Sometimes I admitted. But then I think, would I be who I am if I hadn't gone through what I did? Would I care this much about justice if I hadn't been powerless? Would I fight this hard if I hadn't been cast aside? She studied me. So you're grateful for the trauma. I laughed softly. No, I'm grateful for who I became despite it. There's a difference. We stopped at a coffee shop, the same one where she had handed me the notebook, the evidence that destroyed everything. So much had changed since that day. Melissa reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I've been keeping this. Henry gave it to me after the trial. It's another letter from Grandpa. He wanted you to have it once everything was settled. My hands shook as I opened it, his handwriting again steady and familiar. Dear Anna, if you're reading this, then you've uncovered the truth about my death. I feared it might come to this. I saw the hunger in their eyes, the greed that could swallow even family. That's why I left signs, why I made sure there were tools to uncover the truth. You have proven yourself beyond anything I imagined, not only in your accomplishments, but in your courage. Remember, the best revenge is living well, building a life they said you could never have. You've already won, Anna. Everything else is justice catching up. You are loved. You are worthy. Always. Grandpa. Tears spilled down my cheeks. Melissa reached across the table and held my hand. He knew, I whispered. He knew what they might do, and he still tried to protect me. Melissa's voice was soft but steady. He loved you the way parents should have. And now you honor him every day with what you do. I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket, pressing it over my heart. I'll keep fighting. For Claire. For every tenant. For everyone who gets crushed by people with power and money. That's how I'll honor him. And I'll be right there beside you, Melissa said, smiling through her own tears. We'll be a team. I smiled back. A team. I like that. Time passed. My parents faded into the prison system, their names stripped of power, their reputations rotting in the shadow of their crimes. My mother died of a stroke 4 years into her sentence, bitter until the end. My father lasted longer, spending his final years in the prison library, pretending to repent. But according to Melissa, who saw him once before he died, he never truly understood what he had done. He died thinking he was unlucky, not guilty. Some people never change, but the tenants they hurt rebuilt their lives. Claire sent her daughter to college. Thomas finally received the medical care he needed. Other families bought their first homes, their restitution money, giving them the start they'd been denied. As for me, I became a partner at Kestrel and Associates, then eventually took over when Diane retired. Melissa worked beside me, a paralegal who understood our clients because she had lived under the same roof of manipulation, the same suffocating shadow. Together we built something good out of the ashes. I never married, never had children of my own. My family became the people I helped, the cases I fought, the sister who had finally seen the truth and chosen to stand with me. Sometimes late at night in my office, I would take out my grandfather's letters, running my fingers over the words, reminding myself of the promise he asked me to keep live, well, fight for others, never let them destroy me. And I had kept it, because in the end, the best revenge wasn't watching them fall. It was rising higher than they ever believed I could. It was living a life they said was impossible. It was turning their cruelty into fuel for justice. I had built a life from nothing. I had proven my worth without their approval, and I had ensured they paid for their crimes. That was victory enough. And so to anyone listening now, I'll say this: pain doesn't define you. Betrayal doesn't have to destroy you. What matters is what you build after. Sometimes the most powerful justice isn't in breaking others, it's in becoming everything they said you couldn't be. If my story meant something to you, please like this video, share it so others can hear it. Subscribe to the channel and tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories too, because none of us are truly alone.